Clearly, Marianne Williamson needs no introduction to this crowd, but for the few of you who don't know, I am going to read this beautiful bio. For more than 4 decades, Marianne Williamson has been a leader of spiritually progressive circles, as well as the author of 16 books, 4 of which have been #1 New York Times bestsellers. 2 of her books actually center on American politics, Healing of the Soul of America, and A Politics of Love. Williamson has been a grassroots activist for 35 years, starting with founding Project Angel Food, a nonprofit organization that has delivered more than 18 million meals to ill and dying homebound patients in the Los Angeles area since 1989. The group was created to help people suffering from the ravages of HIV/AIDS. She's worked throughout her career on poverty, anti-hunger, and racial reconciliation issues. She co-founded the Peace Alliance, supporting the creation of a U.S. Department of Peace, and hosted the Sister Giant conferences that introduced thousands of women to how to be more effective in political progress. Williamson ran for Democratic nomination for president in 2020, bringing to the debate stage the issue of reparations and race in America, environmental justice, U.S. policy in Latin America, America's high rate of chronic illness, and the fact that our healthcare system is more of a sickness care system. She ran again in 2024. So we are so very honored to have Marianne Williamson to our stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's delightful to be here with you. It's an honor. I've already met some really wonderful people, seen already some old friends as well. So the listening that is created in a conference like this is up my alley, so I was glad to be invited, and I'm glad to be here. The topic that interests me is the topic really that interests all of us, and that's America. And I'd like to give a little historical context to what we're doing here. In 1776, some very brave men signed a document, and I say that they were brave because if the British had won the Revolutionary War, all of these men would have been hanged as traitors against the King of England. They signed a document that absolutely changed the world. It was profoundly important, not only in terms of the political, but also the moral and spiritual evolution of our species. The world would never be the same. And these 4 principles, the main principles in the Declaration of Independence, form America's mission statement. They are a vision statement. And just like with a personal mission statement or a company's mission statement, you revisit it, you align with it in order to make sure that the next chapter of your unfolding is in line with these basic principles. That all men are created equal. That was radical in 1776. It's radical today. That all men, given by their Creator, the inalienable rights of life, of liberty, and of the pursuit of happiness. And then actually it gets even more radical, that governments are instituted to secure those rights, not chip away at those rights, not diminish those rights, not limit those rights, but to secure those rights. And then it goes on to say that if that government is not doing that job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, that's where it all began, but we're not stupid. We also know where it got gnarly, because out of the 56 signers, 41 of them were slave owners. So America has always been both and. Those principles that I just mentioned are just that, are principles. No one believes that we've ever fully actualized or manifest them. But when I was younger, we used to use the phrase, to form a more perfect union. The idea that it is every government's, every generation's job to further expand that franchise so that there are more and more people for whom those principles are applied. Now, when George Washington made his farewell address, he talked about political parties. And he said that he feared that they would form factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. And John Adams, our second president, said that he feared that political parties would become the biggest threat to American democracy. It's important to remember political parties are not even mentioned in the US Constitution. Now, if you look at American history, you look at those original principles, you look at the fact that they've never been fully actualized, and you look at the fact that as the generations come and the generations go, every generation was dealing with its own iteration of that conflict, that both and baked into our cake. It's baked into America's DNA. We're both and. We are in every generation, ours as much as any other, from the beginning, filled with people who get it, this is like big, this is like serious, this is like so much bigger than any of us individually. This is like big for the ages. This is like something worth living your life for. This is something worth devoting your life for. And throughout the history of the United States, there have been people ready to struggle, to sacrifice, and in some cases even to die in order to make manifest those principles. But there have also been forces in every generation, from the beginning, even in ours, who, for their own ideological and or financial purposes, have no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles made manifest, and have proven, in sometimes the most atrocious ways, that they will actually do whatever it takes to make sure that they are not. Every generation relives the struggles, some more dramatically than others. But in big, big, big movements, when there was such an obvious transgression against the principles on which we purport to stand, generations have risen up. The abolitionist movement arose in response to slavery, but it did not emerge from political parties. It emerged from the Abolitionist Party. And interestingly enough, among white Americans, it emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. The point was that then political parties absorbed it. Same with the institutionalized oppression of women. The women's movement, the women's suffragist movement, did not emerge from a political party. My God, but Woodrow Wilson was majorly against women's suffrage at the beginning. It arose from the Women's Party, and it arose from the fact that many of the women who were head of the women's suffrage movement were themselves religious Quakers. Same with the inherent financial inequities of the Gilded Age. The establishment of organized labor didn't come from political parties. It came, if any political party was part of that, it was the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party is what gave us Social Security. So what happened was that organized labor was established and then absorbed into the political parties. And then, again, with civil rights movement, the institutionalized suppression of black people's segregation in the American South. It was the civil rights movement. It was Martin Luther King. It was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that began all this, that held all this, and then it was absorbed into the Democratic Party. Political parties do not generate social justice. The political parties have historically absorbed the movements which emerge from the people. Now, what's happening now is that we are facing, one more time, the latest iteration of the problem. But in a way, the problem is even more gnarly than it's ever been before. Because before, there were specific institutions that were like operable tumors. You had slavery, we know what to do, we need to abolish it. Women can't vote, we know what we need to do, pass the 19th Amendment. You have Gilded Age, we know what we need to do, establish organized labor. You have segregation in the American South, they knew what to do, pass the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, et cetera. Today, it's not a specific institution. Today, it's an economic paradigm. Today, it is the corporate takeover of everything. Today, it's the very fact that short-term profits for huge corporate entities has become America's governing principle. And just as we talk about corporate capture of federal agencies, just as we talk about the corporate capture of the US Supreme Court, we now have the corporate capture of the two major political parties. So whereas there has been in the past ways for movements emerging from the people to then make their way into the political parties, because the political parties, it's like they were porous. There were ways for those movements to make themselves viable, to make themselves and the ideas that they represented meaningful, so that they were absorbed into major political parties. Today, the two major political parties are actually the main protectors of, the main enablers of, those who chop the wood and carry the water for the huge corporate entities whose financial bottom line has actually replaced democracy as America's organizing principle. Today, we have a matrix of corporate powers: insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, big oil and defense contractors. We have reverted to a situation of aristocracy. Today we call it oligarchy. Over the last 50 years, there has been a massive $50 trillion transfer of wealth away from the bottom 90% of the American people. The late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You can't have both. So once this started with trickle-down economics, you know, I'm not trying to romanticize America's past. I'm not saying that American capitalism was ever perfect. But I can honestly tell you, because I'm old enough to remember, there was a time when there was a social consensus that the corporation was at least supposed to try to care. That there were other stakeholders than stockholders. The stakeholders of the worker, the stakeholders of the community, the stakeholders of animals, the stakeholders of people who live there, people's health. Today, if it's carcinogens in our food, if it's pesticides, whatever it is, if it gets in the way of the bottom line, the bottom corporate line of these huge forces, then good luck. Good luck. And at this point, the very idea of a democracy in which all men are created equal, in which we were given by our Creator inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is not our operating principle. And if you have principles like that that are just, they're like inscribed, you know, on marble walls somewhere, or they're written on parchment underneath glass in Washington, but they're no longer etched on our hearts, then they lose their moral force. And if you have generation after generation that has forgotten its emotional and psychological connection to these principles, then what happens is that we become a generation very easy to play. And that is what has happened. The American people have been played. But I also know, I know it viscerally. I know it because I've lived in the inside of the belly of that beast. This is very, very serious. Now, I'm sure, obviously, the slave owners had it all locked up. Obviously, the forces of institutional suppression of women had it all locked up. Obviously, the purveyors of the Gilded Age had it all locked up. And obviously, the segregationists in the American South had it all locked up. There was a generation that rose up, in every case, and they unlocked it. And that is, in my mind, the point of an independent political movement in the United States today. The two major parties, they have something locked up. And like I said, I've experienced on the deepest level what that looks like. So I think we need to look back at the characterological aspects of the people who unlocked these things before. It's, you know, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's so interesting. America has two major founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, you couldn't have the country we have today if there had not been both of those documents. If there had only been declaring independence from England, that wouldn't have been enough. There was no roadmap going forward. But if there had only been a constitution and no declaration of independence, it wouldn't have worked either. Both are necessary. So it's actually not enough to declare your independence. There has to be a roadmap going forward. Now, in terms of the independent movement politically in the United States today, one of the reasons this is kind of hard is because some people coming from an independent space are leaning to the right, some people are leaning to the left. So in terms of any kind of a political roadmap, I'm not sure anything is possible or even desirable. But I think that there are some characterological issues that have to do not only with what we need to do in order to break free of the stranglehold of corporate-dominated political parties, but it's also, I believe, who we need to be. And that's what Gandhi talked about, and that's what Dr. King talked about. They talked about nonviolent revolution. One of the gentlemen on a panel here earlier today, gentleman from Utah, I can't remember your name. I think I got it, but I'm not sure. But you were alluding to a line from John Kennedy that we've all heard. He said that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And I think that's true. Something's going to implode. And one of the things that's particularly for me very sad to see, two things I want to report that have really saddened my heart. One is what's happening with young people in America today. See, I'm old enough to remember a time when we fought injustice and we won. I actually have that institutional memory of the civil rights movement. I have the institutional memory of the anti-war movement. We have a generation coming up today that has never seen the government work for them. And I grew up in a home where Franklin Roosevelt was revered. I've read every biography I could put my hands on. I believe in a government that actually helps people. And when I was growing up, and even into my young adulthood, I believed that the Democratic Party, more than not, was a conduit for the things that we most wanted. Just as many Republicans say, I didn't leave the Republican Party left me. I'm one of those Democrats who's now felt, I didn't leave it, it left me. In my case, it didn't leave me, it kicked me out. I don't understand the Democratic Party today. It seems intent on shrinking its base. That's why I don't understand that whole thing with the primary. Whether it's Bobby, it was me, whomever. The idea, according to in my case, having to do with the presidential election, the Constitution says that in order to run for president, you have to have been born here, you have to be 35 years old or older, and you have to have lived here for 14 years. It does not say you have to be one of them. It does not say you have to have been a lawyer. It doesn't say you have to have been a governor. It doesn't say you have to have been a senator or a congressperson. And in my case, I don't think that it's the DNC who should determine who's qualified when James Madison did a very good job himself. Thank you very, very much. But something else made me very sad running for office. And that's that the American people, it's so clear to me, the American people are not the problem. The American people, I'm not saying we're better than anyone else, but we're not worse than anyone else. The American people are very decent. When people ask me several times about running, I would say what I learned is that the system, including the way political parties operate, is even more corrupt than I could ever have imagined. And yet the American people are more wonderful than I could have even hoped. The thing is, but the system at this point makes it very, very difficult for the voice of the people to actually be heard. And now that the money is what it is, especially since Citizens United, and for those of you who are now talking about independent candidacies, I know that this has been said here already today, but I just, from my own perspective, want to add to that chorus because it needs to be taken in at the very, very deepest level. None of this is going to work without a lot of money. When a political party says to someone, we're thinking it would be good for you to run for Congress, we think it would be good for you to run for Senate, they follow it with this sentence, Can you self-fund? You know what that means? That means you have $1 million lying around you can afford to waste. How many Americans have $1 million lying around that they can afford to waste? The political parties today are both so captured by corporate forces, the word poverty can't even come out of their mouth. They're talking about serving the middle class. There's a real question, like, what middle class is that? Because over the last 50 years, there has been such a collapse of the American middle class. There is no party that truly represents the economic interests of the vast majority of the American people. There is no major party that truly represents the well-being of our climate, the well-being of our environment. There is no major political party representing regenerative agriculture, that's representing a natural way of doing things, that's representing the basic laws of the principles of the Declaration of Independence, that's representing the way to do farming, the way to do energy, the way to do economics, the way to do anything. And this is what's so sad. We have the geniuses. We have the best practices. We have them in medicine, we have them in energy, we have them in business, we have them in climate mitigation, we have them in peace building. We have them in domestic peace building. We have them in international peace building. The problem is that we don't have the people here who know what to do. The problem is not that we don't have the solutions in this country. The problem is not that we don't have in this country and, of course, around the world, people who have the best practices, have the genius, have the solutions. The problem is that the people with solutions are over here and the people with the power are over here. And the people with the solutions don't have the power. And the people with the power don't really care that much about the people who have the solutions unless it actually adds to their corporate bottom line. And too often, sorry guys, it wouldn't add to your profit today, but it just might save our democracy, and it just might save our planet and our species for another 100 years. So, you know, a lot of people say, well, we need an inside-outside approach. Of course we need an inside-outside approach, but outside we're already doing great things. But we've got to get in there. You've got to get your hands on the levers of power. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I assume everybody is here. How are we going to get in there? It's so locked up. So to me, I find tremendous inspiration from looking at other generations that saw a system that was locked up, and they unlocked it. And so at this point, I think we need to remember certain principles that will guide us. Number one, we must answer brute force with soul force. And now, whether you're talking about brute force, cop cities, or wars overseas, we've simply got to stop using brute force as our primary problem-solving modality. But that applies not only to the violence of a war or the violence of an carceral system, it's the violence of the way we treat the earth. It's violence of the way we treat children. It's violence in the way we treat animals. We've become a very violent society. And so at this point, I think in order for us to change the world out there, we're going to have to change the world in here. Gandhi said that the end is inherent in the means. Everything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. The smug, self-righteous, elitist, arrogant attitudes that are so prevalent on both left and right in America today, they've created such a toxic public square. And what we have with the Democratic Party, just as with the Republican Party, there's a political media industrial complex. Who controls the narrative controls the world. I saw it. I saw it as a candidate. The Democratic Party puts out talking points, and 2 or 3 days later, Joy Behar or Meghan McCain or whoever it is on MSNBC or CNN, they're parroting them. And it's like we've become so codependent. I've heard a lot of people here already at this conference talking about independence of thought. What happened to us? I know in the Democratic Party, we don't primary an incumbent president. Well, really, because I'm old enough to remember Eugene McCarthy. And I'm old enough to remember Bobby Kennedy Sr. We primary incumbent senators. We primary incumbent Congress people and mayors all the time. There's nothing special assignation given to incumbency in the U.S. Constitution, quite the opposite. Incumbency that is perpetuated by a system is called a monarchy, not a democracy. The other one I heard a lot when I was running was, you can't even go listen to her. She's a spoiler. Like, these are people, I guess, didn't go to the 7th grade. They didn't go to civics classes. You can't be a spoiler in a primary. And yet, you know, I've seen it. I've seen how it, you know, we talk about something on social media becoming viral, thoughts go viral. And when they character assassinate and they smear, then they create doppelgangers about people. I read it in Tulsi Gabbard's book when she said they create a narrative about you before you have a chance to create the narrative yourself. They have all kinds of ways to keeping you out of the conversation if they don't want you in the conversation. So my message to those who are obviously so sincere about wanting to create an independent political movement is, first of all, I couldn't agree with you more that it's necessary. Secondly, I just want to say what I know all of you know, but I really want you to know it's going to be hard. You need to do it. It's the only chance for our democracy. But none of us should be in any way giddy about this. This is hard stuff. These people are serious, and they have no scruples, and they have no ethics. And we have a media that has no ethics. And mainstream media, I don't know what happened at journalism schools. There don't seem to be ethical classes anymore. I mean, people will spin things. People will lie. People just so casually lie in America today. And what is done, I don't think that the political elite in this country has any idea what it has done to the psyche of this nation, this 50-year war on the middle classes and the lower economic classes of the United States. People are struggling. People can hardly make it. You have almost half of Americans who are reporting that they regularly skip meals in order to pay their rent. We have millions of Americans who are selling their blood plasma in order to not have to live out of their car. We have over 1 million Americans who are rationing their insulin. We have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt. There is so much suffering out there. I live in Washington, D.C. I'd always heard it was a bubble. It's more than a bubble. It's like it's like a walled city. People are emotionally buffered. It's not in their neighborhood. They don't see it. You know, when you drive through any of the least advantaged neighborhoods in America today, you see blood plasma centers everywhere. Do you know what that's about? Now, of course, we need, you know, pharmaceutical scientists need blood plasma, obviously, they're needed, but this is selling blood plasma, people who are doing it in order to pay their rent, in order to be able to, even sometimes if they're living in their car, and selling your blood plasma is not like just going and having your blood drawn. It's a very painful, awful physical procedure. That's what people are living with. And you have a younger generation who's never seen it being any different. The nihilism, the toxicity, the anger, the frustration, something's going to blow here if we do not create an alternative. And if the Democratic Party is not going to create a compelling alternative to fascism, we have to. So that's really what I wanted to say. It's going to cost a lot of money, a lot of money. So in order to see the kind of seriousness that is involved in playing at the level, because these people will smash you. They will just smash you. I ran as an independent when I ran for Congress. Because I felt, even then, back in 2014, I felt, you know, this is wrong. We need to have some independence in there. And these political parties, they have ways. Vendors who are told, you'll never, we'll never do business with you if you work with her or him. All kinds of ways. And I don't want to go on and on about the Democratic Party because I don't have any illusions that the Republican Party is any better. I think this is about the parties, period. And we have this class of political operatives. It's an industry. There's no particular ethics there. There's no particular love of American democracy and the Declaration of Independence and the possibility of creating a society where more and more people have the possibility of self-actualization. That's what this is about. That anybody in this country should be able to spread their wings, do whatever they want, be whoever they want to be, unless it hurts somebody else. That is the dream. That is the dream that we are serving. And it is very sad to admit to ourselves, but true, some other countries in a lot of ways are doing it better than we are. And so at this point, whoever you are, whatever calls you here, there's a seriousness about this purpose. Some of you, it will be about financial things. Some of you, it will be about organizational things. Some of you, it will be about political roadmaps. But I think we need to look at the characterological aspects that are necessary in order for us to take this anywhere. And that's number one. I'm in this, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. And we're going to have to become people for whom political activism is simply a layer of what we consider to be a well-lived, meaningful life. We will not be able to pull off this peaceful revolution if it's just something we kind of sort of do sometimes. See, that's the thing about terrorists. They're not kind of sort of sometimes when it's convenient committed. Those who hate are hateful with conviction. Miracles arise from conviction. Those of us who love, those of us whose hearts are ablaze with the possibilities in this country, we have to love with conviction. If you have 10 people who hate with conviction and 100 people who say, well, you know, I think this sounds good, and I have Tuesdays and Thursdays between 2 and 4, the haters will win. We got to deepen with this. I've taken the hits of it. I know what I'm talking about. This is not something that's going to be easily unlocked. This is something that's going to take a critical mass of people who something happens inside us. And that's what I hope is part of what comes from your conference, is that more people leave here more deeply committed, not even knowing what it looks like, because you're just to the point of what the roadmap is. But first you start with your state of being, and then the state of doing will emerge from that. Number one, that we're really serious. Number two, that it's not going to be easy. Number three, that all of us are going to have to, who feel participatory in this, we have to be willing to play our part. And we'll all know, you know, Gandhi was asked, who is the leader of the Indian independence movement? And his answer was, the small, still voice within. Whatever led you here, whatever makes you feel, I want to be part of this, stand up. We have allowed ourselves and this generation to be infantilized. None of this is going to happen if we have a bunch of men acting like boys. None of this is going to happen if we have a bunch of women acting like little girls. Enough with, I'm so traumatized, and I know about being traumatized by the political system. Enough. It can't be, I'm so wounded. No. Enough with, are you okay? Enough with, what trauma are you dealing with today? Enough with, what wound are you dealing with today? What we've got to start saying to each other is, what great thing are you doing today, and how can I help? That's who we have to grow into. We have to be big men and women to pull this off, because that's who the abolitionists were, and that's who the women's suffragists were. We think we've had it tough. Do you know what women's suffragists alone went through? Do you know what they did to those women simply for marching for the right for women to vote? These women were thrown into prison, and the conditions in the prison were so awful that they went on a hunger strike. And the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells, and they forced onto their necks. Remember, women at that time, men into your cell, you're hopeless. They force onto you these metal contraptions to force feed you. And you think, we've just had it so hard. No. No. And guess what? They prevailed. The abolitionists prevailed, and those women prevailed, and the early labor organizers prevailed, and the civil rights workers prevailed. But they were big people, and they were committed people, and they were serious people. And they didn't do it by ignoring the depth of the problem. They had slavery that they were dealing with. They had institutional suppression of women that they were dealing with. They had the Gilded Age and the forces of finance turned against the majority of people. They had institutionalized suppression of black people. They knew what they were dealing with, but they knew that they were ready. They knew that they had within them something. And let's not forget, as I told you, for anybody who wants to poo-poo in any way the role of faith in these great movements, as I said before, among white people, the early abolitionists emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. Many of the women who were the leaders of the women's suffrage movement were religious Quakers. And let's not forget, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. Dr. King said it's time to inject a new dimension of love into human civilization, the veins of human civilization. He said that in order to establish the beloved community, and to me that would be the full actualization of the potential of American democracy, he said we need quantitative changes in our circumstances and qualitative shifts in our souls. So my hope is that along with the conversations about political changes and external changes that we need, we're also going to need some qualitative shifts in our souls. A grief for what is happening in this country, a commitment to being part of the solution, a recognition that this is going to challenge all of us to rise to a level of maturity and dedication and seriousness, probably beyond anything we've ever exhibited before. The realization that this can't be kind of, sort of, sometimes. The idea that each and every one of us has to do our part to hold this thing up. The realization that we're not alone. There are people all over this country, there are people all over this world who are downloading the emergence of a new world that is struggling to be born. We are living at a time of two simultaneous phenomena. One world is crumbling before our eyes, and another world is emerging and struggling to be born. We are called upon to be both death doulas and birth doulas, so that the death is done with wisdom and responsibility. It is careful. It is compassionate, it is deeply sober and caring for all living things. And also knowing that being a birth doula can be tough too, because pregnancy is not always easy and labor is not always easy. But if any generation had it in them to do it, we have it in it to do it. And I used to think that we didn't. I used to think that, oh God, if this generation has to handle this, we got a problem. I don't believe that anymore. We are a prodigal son generation. And the father was more excited to see the son who left and came back than to see the son who never left. We partied long enough. Pray in the morning, kick ass in the afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful being with you. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful being with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Oh my God.
God bless you, everybody.
More
Thank
for
you.
Marianne Williamson. More.